This episode of Creep Street Podcast is brought to you by Martini Coffee Roasters. Martini Coffee Roasters is not a martini-flavored coffee. In fact, it is a family-owned and operated company run by the Martini family. And while I'm sure they enjoy a good cocktail, they are all about that high-quality, smooth, flavorful coffee. Unlike many other roasters, Martini Coffee Roasters roast manually using a traditional method of roasting, most relying on sight and sound to ensure the best results, okay? This is quality, people. This is artisanal. This is handmade. This is what you're wanting. And not only that, but they also sell green coffee beans for those home roasters out there. So please support small businesses and check out Martini Coffee Roasters at martinicoffee.com. Once again, check out Martini Coffee Roasters at martinicoffee.com.
You've taken a wrong turn down Creep Street.
Citizens of the Milky Way, my name is Dylan Hackworth.
I'm Maureen Bogey.
And this is Creep Street. Real quick up top, of course, follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Creep Street Podcast.
Ooh.
Twitter at Creep Street Pod.
That's right.
On our Facebook, we have another group called Citizens of the Milky Way. It's a little forum where we like to interact with all of our listeners and post stories we like. And our listeners, they like to post memes and stories and stuff. Real cool place to interact, hang out. Also, subscribe if you're listening on Apple. Subscribe, rate, review. If you're listening on Spotify, hit that follow. If you're listening on, because we're on everything, I think.
We're everywhere, baby.
We're pretty much on every app.
Yeah.
Do whatever their function is for following and liking. Mm-hmm. Of course, we also have a Patreon. If once a week is just not good enough.
You need some more. You got an itch. You got a Creep Street itch.
You need a little more creep in your street. You know what I mean? Come to patreon.com/Creep Street Podcast, and you can get all sorts of extra goodies. And real quick, let me read off the names of our Patreon subscribers at the top tier.
Please.
The Dream, James Watkins. The Finnish Face, Via Alungfist. The Madman, Marcus Hall. The Vivacious Vicky McHugh. The Tenacious Teresa Hackworth. The Heartbreak Kid, Chris Hackworth. The Oh So Suave, Sean Richardson. The British Bone Breaker, Bex Martin. The Notorious Nicholas Barker. The Terrifying Taylor Lashmet. And the Count of Cool, Cameron Corliss. The Archduke of Attitude, Adam Archer. The Sinister Sam Kiker. And the Nightmare of New Zealand, Noeline Vivili.
Ooh, you know how I love listening to those names.
Yeah, that's right. Once again, if you would like extra goodies, go to patreon.com/Creep Street Podcast. But Momo, I am going to hand it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for handing this over for this kind of different vibe for today's episode. You Creep Streeters understand. Those members of the Creep Street Homeowners Association will understand that we usually do paranormal, true crime, cults, serial killers, ghosts,
UFOs, cryptids.
That's usually where we're going. It's a wide net, and that's what we like. We like to pull things from all over the world that are creepy, weird, interesting. And this is definitely one of them. This fits Creep Street. Yeah. It does. It's just a little bit different.
This is a different kind of monster we're talking about today.
Today we are talking about Dr. Quincy Fortier. We're going to call him Fortier because that seems like the most prevalent pronunciation for his name. Right. It's probably actually like Fortier.
Yeah, I've heard it go both. Some people say Fortier, some people Fortier. Yeah, so we'll go with what do they say in Baby God?
Fortier.
They say Fortier in Baby God? Okay.
As Dylan just mentioned, this episode was inspired by and was a main source for this podcast, the HBO documentary entitled Baby God. It is a fascinating documentary. I highly recommend you watch it either before or after listening to this. Doesn't really matter. But Dr. Fortier was a fertility specialist with his main years of active doctoring, if you will, between the 40s and the 90s, so a long time. And he was discovered to have been using his own sperm samples with his fertility patients. So that's who we're talking about today. So now that you got a little bit up front, let's talk about our sources. One of my main sources was the documentary entitled Baby God. It's on HBO. I think it's HBO original, so I believe it's only on HBO right now, but it'll get out there. Directed by Hannah Olsen, who has been involved both as a director and also a producer for a lot of great documentaries. And then 2 articles specifically, one from The Atlantic called The Fertility Doctor's Secret by Sarah Zhang, and another from The Washington Post entitled He Was Doctor of the Year for Helping Thousands of Women Get Pregnant, but DNA Tests Unraveled a Dark Secret by Timothy Bella.
Okay.
I feel like nowadays with the internet, headlines are insane and they are so long. I'm going to read this headline again just so you guys can hear how long this is. He was Doctor of the Year for helping thousands of women get pregnant, but DNA tests unraveled a dark secret. Headlines used to just be like, JFK shot.
I don't know. Why do you need a goddamn synopsis?
Yeah, it's just
in the
a lot.
headline. Yeah.
But I think that's just the internet world. So really quick, let's just go back a little bit to the beginning of artificial insemination, at least for humans.
Right.
Now, if there's anyone listening to this show that is a doctor, really a doctor of any kind, but especially if you are OBGYN, if you are involved in fertility, or if you are educated or working in the genetics field and you feel so inclined, please reach out to us, because I would love to get more details about how this could happen for so long and how maybe, we would just love to know.
And obviously we're not experts on genetics and how this works. We are absorbing the info and trying to give it back to you in the best way we know how to describe it and stuff and stuff like that.
And genetics, I think, are so fascinating. I've always felt that way. And I think most people probably feel that way in some degree. I mean, how wild is it that there are so many things about us as people, as individuals, that are kind of predestined based on our DNA. And it's not only what we look like, it's also, it affects our interests, our behaviors, our whatever.
Wild.
It's crazy. Also, your DNA or your genetics doesn't, this is something that we'll talk about a lot as we go forward. And a lot of the, I don't even know what you would call them, but the victims or the children that were made from this, that's something that they really have to kind of juggle with too, is it's that nature versus nurture situation, like being able to understand that it's very interesting knowing how we come to be. And it's interesting, it's not just DNA, it's also, how you are raised, and your parenting makes a huge difference, your environment. But in 1884, there was a doctor named William Pancoast, and he was helping a couple that were having issues with infertility. And Dr. Pancoast decided to try something new that hadn't been done before. He sedated the woman, and he injected her with semen from the best looking medical student that he knew. And it worked. And this was the first documented case of successful donor insemination. The doctor only told the husband, though, after the fact, after the baby was born, that, hey, this wasn't your sperm sample, it was from someone else. And the husband agreed to never tell his wife.
Jeez. And
it just was a secret. And it was kind of like the doctor and the husband felt that the means justified the end, that there was a healthy baby in the family. They thought that it didn't really matter.
Was it due to the husband's sperm? Like, was he infertile? Like, why did he go ahead and just, I'll use this sperm?
Right.
And also, how do you broach that subject with that medical student?
Exactly.
Like, hey, champ, come in here real quick. Gotta talk to you real quick.
I got you some magazines you're really gonna love. But keep listening.
Well, that's what I want to know. Did the husband, was the infertility on his side? Like, because it just seems like a weird thing to do. By the way, that sperm sample you gave me, I tossed it.
Right.
I went with someone much better looking.
Yes.
Like, I don't get that.
That is something I'm confused about too. And this comes up again and again and again. So I do believe that in the cases that we are talking about today, the infertility is mainly on the male side.
Okay.
And Dr. Fortier, he was a fertility specialist, so he saw lots of patients, I'm sure dealt with women that had infertility issues too, but it seems like the fertility issues that are relevant to this story all were the men were the ones having the fertility issue. And in this case, that is what was happening. But that's the thing, and you will see this over and over again. At the time, this is once again back in 1884. So definitely then, and even up through part of the 20th century, giving a sperm sample was kind of considered to be like donating blood. They didn't really think much of it. And I don't know why. That doesn't really make sense to me, because I understand that people didn't understand genetics really at that time.
Right.
So I get it. But at the same time, it's like, though, that the man has got to literally pop off.
Right.
Inside the woman to work. So it's like,
right.
You gotta know, and you also, everyone knows, like, hey, children look like their parents. So that's why I'm like, I don't really understand, even though they didn't really know what was going on in that jungle juice in the man's Pen 15, it more specifically his balls. But they knew, though, that it was what was making the baby. So whatever. So what I'm saying, I don't know why they were like, it's just like giving blood, but they did feel that way.
Okay.
Also, up until in the 1800s and also well into the 20th century, doctors didn't know that you could freeze sperm, or didn't know like how to freeze sperm. I don't know exactly how that went, but so they were like, oh, we got to use a fresh sample. A fresh supply, if you will.
Okay.
That's part of the reason why maybe a really hot med student was used.
Right.
He needed someone that was there right then. Right away. This isn't meal prep, baby. You're cooking it on the fly. We're doing this fresh.
This is fast food, baby.
This is fast food, but this is fresh fast food.
Yeah. This is
fresh.
Fast.
This is fresh food fast. And I want you to remember that anytime you're near a baby or a penis, just keep that in mind, or a vagina for that matter. But because people didn't either know they could freeze sperm or didn't know how to freeze sperm or whatever, going forward, a lot of medical students would donate their sperm. And in that way, that was more in a kosher way.
Right.
In a way where further into the 20th century, people understood that they were getting a donor.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? So the medical students donating sperm in itself is not wrong.
Donating sperm is fine. Right.
But it is interesting, though, because these doctors, so many medical students in the early 20th century were donating sperm, especially med students that wanted to be an obstetrician or be in fertility. So it's interesting. There are a lot of doctors now, a lot of fertility doctors now who have found out that they have like a bunch of kids that they never knew of.
Wow.
Because of things like Ancestry.com, 23andMe, and things like that. And it's just so funny how the mindset was totally different. Like they got paid, I think like $50 a sample. So they're poor college students or medical students. So they're willing to do that. And it's not hard for them. They're like,
$50 for jerking off?
for J&O. I mean, what's wrong?
Absolutely.
Like that's kind of the dream, I think.
Yeah.
For most people. But
work at home?
Work from home, baby. That is the problem. You did have, I think you had to be there.
That was
because
the
of
first,
the fresh food.
That was the first working from home.
That's when you
jerking from home.
Okay. That could be a sticker or a t-shirt. So it just kind of goes back to this kind of state of mind, or not a state of mind, but just a way of thinking that was like, this isn't a big deal. I'm donating a bodily fluid. It's like I'm donating blood.
Right.
Even though people understood what was going on, it was just different. And also at the time, if you donated your sperm, there was like no way the child that was a result of this sperm would find them. There either wasn't a lot of record keeping about it at all, or if there was, it was like you could sign something that was like you don't want to be found, basically.
Right.
But now, once again, with Ancestry.com, 23andMe, that's kind of, it doesn't really work that way anymore.
Right.
So that's just a little bit about the background in general, and some about like the repercussions of that today, but more so the more tame repercussions where everyone was kind of on board and no one was being fucking tricked.
Right, exactly.
But let's talk more about this man, actual Dr. Quincy Fortier.
Yes.
Dr. Fortier was born in 1912 in Massachusetts. And he said that growing up, he had 3 cows.
Okay.
One cow got pregnant one time and then was never able to get pregnant again after that.
Okay.
And that was kind of, he said, was what kind of got him interested, kind of got that spark in him about fertility and infertility and how that works and why that can happen. And
So it's when the bug bit him.
That's when the bug got him.
When the fertility bug bit him.
He eventually decides to begin his career in Nevada.
Okay.
And he opens this hospital in a really small rural town called Pioche, Nevada.
Okay.
I think that's how you say it. And this was a small town that desperately needed a doctor. There was no doctor there. So
Of any kind.
of any kind at all. Because
Right.
once again, he was a fertility specialist, but he was kind of like a jack of all trades. Where
Right,
he
right.
could do lots of different things. I mean, even though he did so many monstrous things that you will hear as we go on,
Right.
he was, by many different accounts, a very brilliant doctor.
Right.
So he was able to help with lots of different things. And being the only doctor in the town, he was like the doctor you saw him for anything.
Right.
Even, men, children, whatever. And eventually he decided to move to Las Vegas, Nevada to start a women's hospital there. There are a few reasons for that. One, the main reason was Las Vegas is not exactly like how it is now, but there was still, the whole Vegas industry going on there.
Right.
And I don't know if that is why or if there's some other reason. I don't know. But I think like 70% of the population there was female.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So
because dancers is like
dancers and
showgirls
performers.
and stuff?
I'm
Interesting.
assuming that's why.
Oh, okay.
Maybe
Very cool.
there's other reasons along with it too. I don't. Maybe World War II affected that.
That's another good point. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know exactly why that is, but there was a mark. He could do really well there. There's a
Right.
market for it. So he built a women's hospital there, and it, by all accounts, was a great hospital. People were treated really, really well, helped with lots of different things, and Dr. Fortier became the fertility guy in
Right.
Las Vegas. Like, he was the best. Everyone was like, oh, if you want to get pregnant, go to him. He's the best. Jesus Christ. You're like, well,
Right. If he's the best, he's the
be-
best.
is he the best? But I guess he was the best, but at what cost? So he's working there, and he, not even just working there, he was running the place, and he was doing very well. More on his personal side, he got married and had 5 biological children, but his wife had been married previously and had a child before they got married. So he adopted that daughter. Her name's Connie. He adopted her as well. So the total was 6 kids. And they would get divorced, however, sometime during the 60s. And after that, he would adopt 2 more girls that he raised by himself. Now, during the 60s, right around when he was getting divorced, actually, which keep a little earmark on that, do a little a dog ear, if you will, a little pull the page down. Remember that.
Okay. Tuck the corner in.
Tuck the corner, and that's what I'm trying to say.
Okay.
A woman named Kathy Holm visited Dr. Fortier because she looked in the phone book, and under fertility specialist, there was his name. This was before Yelp. This was before, you know what I mean? Whatever. But even if it was there, everyone would only be giving glowing positive reviews of this man.
Right.
So he was highly recommended, but it's also it's funny that people just didn't know. People didn't know it would be worthwhile to look into a doctor. At the time, it was kind of like, oh, they're a doctor, then everything they say is right. They must be a good doctor, whatever. So she goes in to see Dr. Fortier. She was having trouble getting pregnant, and he said to bring in sperm samples from her husband and that he would do the insemination in the office.
Okay.
Now, I don't know exactly how long the sample needs to be fresh. Like, I don't know if the dad JO'd and then immediately brought it to the hospital, the women's hospital, maybe that would be quick enough. I don't really know. So at the very least, either this is possible or Kathy Holm thought it was possible. I don't know. A few months go by, she gets pregnant, and she has a baby named Wendy. All through growing up, Kathy noticed that her daughter Wendy really didn't look like her husband's side of the family at all.
Interesting. Okay.
And she always thought that was weird, but never really thought much about it. And her daughter was also very, very smart, very clinically minded.
Right.
And Kathy said that she and her husband were not like that. So she thought that was interesting.
Not saying they're dumb. She's just saying.
Right. She's just saying they're not like super, just a different kind of smart. You know
different
what
kind
I mean?
of smart, obviously. Yeah.
It's not, yeah. But of course, these things happen all the time.
Happen all the time.
So you never really thought anything of it.
Exactly.
But Wendy, she growing up noticed all of these things too, thought it was odd, but once again, never really gave a second thought to it.
Right.
She actually grew up to be a homicide detective.
Wow.
And obviously being a detective was very curious, very into solving clues, solving puzzles, finding clues.
Right.
That, as you'll see, will help her in the next chapter of her journey. Wendy, when she finally retired, she was interested in her family tree and her genealogy, like many people are. I actually did this too during COVID. During quarantine, I myself got into Ancestry.com. I never did the DNA test part. I just did the family tree part. And I'm happy to say that if you go back about 1,000 years, there's a lord or lady in my family.
Well, there you go.
So I am just like Queen Victoria, Queen Elizabeth, all of them.
That's right. You're royal, baby.
Just like all of them. She found a different surprise, not a royal surprise like we all want. She noticed a lot of first cousins popping up in her family tree because she did the DNA one.
Right. And I think it was just Ancestry.com, right?
Yeah, and that's,
Hey, I guess if you had any doubts if those things were legit, sounds like they're legit to a fault. You might find out shit you don't want to know.
You don't want to know.
So that was actually kind of interesting when we were watching this documentary. It's like, I mean, not that I thought they were not legit, but it's just like, you always wonder, like, how do you really know? But it turns out they're pretty damn accurate.
Exactly. So she sees all these first cousins, thinks that's very odd because she doesn't have any cousins. So she's like, what is going on? And then she sees a bunch of half siblings coming up. And she's thinking that's odd. And the name Fortier is popping up again and again and again. She's like, what is going on? And eventually she was able to put it together that her mother was seeing this fertility doctor named Dr. Fortier.
Wow.
She tells her mother about it, and her mother, Kathy, is absolutely distraught.
I'm sure.
And
I mean, this is how many years after the fact, too? Like, her daughter's grown up. I
think 50 years later or something.
She's like an accomplished professional in her field. Wow.
And her mother was just distraught, and apparently her mom was just saying he was older than my dad. Because at the time when her mom went to see Dr. Fortier, she was like 22 years old. And Dr. Fortier was like 50-something. I mean, and that was older than her dad was at the time. That's so weird.
Yeah.
And they had no idea. They thought that was her husband's sperm.
Right.
But clearly it wasn't. And as Wendy, the daughter of this, she started doing more research and reaching out to people that she was related to, her half siblings. She was able to connect with them, and they seemed to have made the same realization as well, that infertility was something that brought them all together, and that's how their connection really was made. And Wendy's story is so interesting. She's kind of the one she's kind of the through line through the documentary, just because of her nature, I guess, which is so like ironic that she is so clinically minded and wants to find answers and wants to know what's going on. So she's really delving deep into finding answers and finding family.
Exactly.
And one person, another one of her half siblings, is named Brad Gulko. And what's unreal to me is that he just happened to become a doctor and got his PhD in human evolutionary genomics.
Wow.
Isn't that insane?
That's weird. It makes you wonder, like, damn,
yes.
How much does genetics play into shit?
It's so weird. And this guy, Brad Gulko, looks exactly like Dr. Quincy Fortier. Maybe that has something, that's maybe why he also was drawn towards genes and just reproduction in general. And he only had found out about this like 2 months or so before his interview for the documentary, which is insane. That's crazy. And the way he found out about it was actually his mother was talking to who now was living in Southern California, was talking to a friend of hers or acquaintance or someone who also had used to live in Las Vegas. And the person was like, oh, there's all this drama, tea, if you will, about this Dr. Fortier using his own sperm samples. Mm-hmm. And she was like, I saw Dr. Fortier during the time that this woman was talking about.
Right.
What's crazy is Dr. Fortier was good friends with Brad Gulko's dad. And they had served together in the Civil Air Patrol. And so when there was issue with Brad's mom getting pregnant, they went right to their friend. You know, they really trusted this man. They were friends, or at least his dad was friends with Dr. Fortier. And he just completely lied to him.
Wow.
And used his own sperm samples instead. And what's crazy is Dr. Fortier even delivered Brad as a child.
Wow.
So he delivered his own child while lying to Brad's dad, Mr. Golko, and saying, this is your son.
Interesting.
And it's his friend. It's like, how could you do that? That's crazy.
That's bizarre. It's awful, obviously, but just wild.
Yeah. And so Brad got one of these tests done, which is so funny that he like didn't do it himself, but I think it must be like expensive or, I don't know. So he and his sister did it, and his sister came up almost 100% Ashkenazi Jew, where he only came up about 50% Ashkenazi Jew. And so that kind of was the nail in the coffin.
Right. Wow.
This man, Brad, is another guy that is just so fascinated with learning this information because he felt like he was very, very different from his dad. And he felt like there was like something wrong with him because he was nothing like his dad. He said his dad was really outgoing and extroverted and social, and he didn't feel that way. And it felt like it wasn't just that he was different. It felt like there was something wrong with him. He's like, why am I so inherently different than my family, or at least my dad? And it really, really kind of bothered him growing up. But I will admit that this is an interesting gray area. And it's not gray area. I mean, this is wrong.
Absolutely. Right,
this is a wrong thing to do. But you could see how he could possibly have good intentions.
Right, in a warped sense, right. And we're saying, obviously, what this man did, awful.
Yeah.
We're saying, in that warped mind, you could see how he might feel like he's doing something good.
Right, like the end justifies the means. These people, they are desperate for a baby. And he felt like, I'm able to give it to them. They're never going to know. And
if you're desperate to have a baby, you're not going to question things like you would.
And people weren't even really, especially early in his career, weren't even really aware of a donor. They didn't really even know that was like a thing that they could even do. Or just never even really crossed their mind. So no one thought to ask.
Right.
You know what I mean? So, but that's another thing that really shows how wrong this is that he didn't tell. He didn't ask.
Right.
Because a lot of these people, maybe they would be okay with just a donor. But a lot of these people, they're like, no, the two of us want a baby. That's not what they would want. And even if they did want the donor, it's supposed to be anonymous. That's like the whole point. The fact that it's someone it's very odd. But in his mind, it seems like, or at least others are explaining for him. And I think this is an attack.
Absolutely.
A lot of women who went through this at first, they're a whole gamut of emotions, the women that have gone through this.
Well, it's such a violation in a way that is so insidious, in a way that's such a cruel thing to do, and people are so thankful for it.
Exactly.
Because they don't know. So in a weird way, it's even worse because this thing is being done to them and they're welcoming it with open arms because they don't know.
They don't know any better.
Yeah.
And it's so complicated because a lot of these women, they're like, of course, I love my child.
Of
like
course.
They feel happy that they have a child, but it's not with who they thought it was. It's such a violation. I mean, some of these women kind of go from feeling just kind of like uncomfortable by it all the way to feel like they were raped.
Absolutely. Right.
And I honestly understand any of it. It's fucking weird.
Right.
But Dr. Fortier was open about this with his family. He told his family that he was doing this.
Right.
The way he phrased it was he was just, quote, helping out. Sometimes he also would say, I just add my sperm to the sample to help with the, quote, swim up. But it's like, that is a huge risk though, sir, clearly. Like, if your sperm is just helping with the swim up, okay, then there's a 50-50 chance then it's going to be your sperm or the husband's sperm. It's like, that's why I'm like, it doesn't really make any sense.
Clearly, I don't know how the intricacies of how this works because the fucking swim up, like, I get that that's probably a thing, but like...
Yeah. Because some sperm are like weak and their tails aren't fucking swimming right, or they swim too hard. Sperm can be finicky little guys.
Yeah, they're little flakes.
I mean, listen,
they got places to go. Have you ever seen footage of them? They're
got places so
to
busy.
go. They're busy.
Yeah, geez. I almost feel bad for the guys.
Yeah, running the rat race, you know?
Jesus. They're only alive for a little while. I mean, geez, it's kind of a So, in that way, you could say, okay, well, at least he... Not condoning this, obviously, but you say, okay, maybe he at least thought he was doing the right thing.
Right.
No, this next story will show you that.
Also, many evil people have thought they were doing the right thing.
Exactly. What is it? The street to hell is paved with gold,
good
with good
intentions
intentions
or something like that. Streets, yeah.
Yeah, or something,
Something like that, yeah.
You get it. Insert that saying here.
Yeah.
Squad. Okay. There is a man named Mike Otis. He grew up in this small town of Pioche, Nevada, where Dr. Fortier had his earlier hospital. And that was the one where he saw people for everything, not just fertility or OBGYN reasons. So Mike Otis's mother went to the Pioche hospital because she said she wasn't feeling well and she felt like she had some kind of infection. Mm-hmm. She didn't say what it was exactly, but she did consent to a vaginal exam. Uh-huh. So I'm assuming it was like a yeast infection or something like that. But it could have also been like she felt her stomach was having issues and maybe she thought she had like a bladder infection or something. I don't know exactly. But so she was not there for any kind of fertility treatment. She was there to be treated because she felt like she was ill. Dr. Fortier saw her and he said, "I'll be right back." He left for a while and he came back in, saw her, and next thing she knows, she's pregnant. She was married, but she didn't want to be pregnant. She really did not like her husband. It was a really bad, abusive relationship. She was actively trying to not get pregnant. Oh. And she was saving money for school. She was 20 years old when she married this man. So she was like ready to start her life over and she was young. She had time. Yeah. And then she gets pregnant. She just thinks that she got pregnant by her husband. Right. But it wasn't. So this man, evil enough, also entrapped her in an abusive relationship. Mm-hmm. Oh my God. Yeah. What a piece of shit. But Dr. Fortier, I don't think he even knew. Right. I think he just knew she was married, thought that'll cover this up and I'll inseminate her. So he saw her, thought she was, so this is the only explanation. He saw her, thought she was hot, went into another room, jacked off, and then inseminated her. Good God. And yeah, of course, there is a biological evolutionary need in all of us to reproduce and diversely reproduce, whatever. This is not that. This is not that. This is mania. That is one of the most fucked up things I've ever heard. This is derangement. That's wild. Yeah. This is like disgusting. Yeah. So her husband ended up leaving her a few years later, and Mike Otis grew up without a father. So he always felt like there was like something wrong with him. Like he had the blood of this man that was abusing his mom in his veins, but he gets older, does the 23andMe thing or Ancestry.com and finds all of this out. And so he told his mom about this when she was, I believe, 93 years old. She's thought her whole life that this was her son from a marriage. And she had a really, interesting reaction to it. She, of course, I didn't see her react, hearing the news for the first time. That's not in the documentary, but she, of course, I think felt a myriad of different things and felt violated. However, she did say, which is so strange, she did feel a little bit of relief that her son wasn't the son of that man. That her son wasn't the son of her ex-husband. Right. Which is just so interesting. It shows like that man must have been trash. Must have been. That you are relieved that you didn't. That he has no spawn. Essentially, that he did not. Obviously, she would have loved the child, and obviously, even if she did conceive a child, it doesn't mean that child's bad or something. But what you said, it's just great. She's happy she didn't have to carry on that legacy. Yeah, and that's something that all of these people, these half siblings that have come forward, are talking about and really have kind of a hard time reconciling. Is that they come from a man who did such evil things. Yeah. And like we said, it's one of those things where just because your parent is a certain way doesn't mean that you are going to be exactly like them. Like it doesn't, if your parent commits murder, that doesn't mean you are murderous or whatever. But at the same time, there are so many things that you are that come from your family that you're not aware of, you don't mean, even if you have never met them. Just kind of trying to reconcile that. And it's hard. And I think everyone has felt that way to a degree. Right. You have to kind of do that soul searching, that journey for yourself, and it's just it's hard. The biological and psychological effects of genetics play a huge part in who we are. Whether it's you're living with parents who you don't share DNA with, and maybe that affects you, or you have parents that you do share DNA with and that affects you. And same thing with if you think you share DNA with someone and you actually don't share DNA with someone, that can be really hard. Kind of like what we said before, you feel like you don't fit in, you feel like there's something wrong with you.
Right.
Unfortunately, this wasn't the only time that Dr. Fortier inseminated or impregnated someone without their knowledge or consent. The oldest child of the Fortier family was...
So the children that actually he raised...
His actual,
children that he raised and were his household children.
The oldest one was not his daughter because his wife had a previous marriage. And so he adopted her, but she was not biologically related to him. She later said that Dr. Fortier was regularly molesting her from the ages of about 4 to 13 years old. And he would molest her at any time, but also during her health examinations because he was her doctor. And he was doing vaginal exams on her. Most women don't go to see a gynecologist until they're 18 years old or they start having sex.
Right.
And that's not like a hard and fast line. There's differences. But there's no reason for a 6-year-old to be going to a gynecologist. Some years go by. He is continuing to give her medical care. And at 17, she becomes pregnant. She's a virgin.
And she's never actually had sex.
She has never had sex. Or at least she said she was not sexually active. I think that means she has never been sexually active. So I think that means she's a virgin.
She's actually a virgin who got
pregnant. She wanted to get an abortion because she knew what happened. Because she's like, what else could it possibly be?
Right.
And Dr. Fortier said no and made her go to Minnesota, go for a home for unwed mothers and give birth there.
As if it was some mistake. As if she
was sleeping around.
If she was What a piece of trash.
And that's when Connie's mother, Dr. Fortier's wife, divorced him.
Good.
Unfortunately, Connie, the oldest child, was not the only one being molested. All 6 children were being regularly molested by Dr. Fortier. So he's not only molesting and inseminating his oldest child, who was not biologically related to him, but he was molesting all of his children.
And didn't he even try, the daughter that got pregnant, didn't he even try to float the idea that it could be some sort of immaculate conception?
One thing is, later on, because Dr. Fortier actually later on met this son that was born from this insemination as an adult. And the son talked to him, and Dr. Fortier was trying to say that there was a possibility it could have been a virgin birth.
Jesus.
This doctor, this fertility doctor. And he didn't only say that, he also said, it was, I didn't really know what was going on. I accidentally had one swab and it had my semen on it. And there was this, and I was accidentally used the wrong swab. And I put that swab inside of her by mistake. And after she left, I realized my mistake. And oh no, you don't just dip a Q-tip in I'm sorry, I know that you don't just dip a Q-tip in the J.O. sauce. You know what I'm saying? And then just kind of swig it around by the vagina. You gotta put it up there.
Right.
So you can't just accidentally do this.
He had the fucking intent to do it.
But as I said, he also molested his other children as well. I don't believe he tried to do any sort of insemination on them. First of all, because I think the girls were too young.
Right.
Also, hopefully he would understand enough that would be a very bad idea. And it was around that time too that the mother of the family found out about the molestation, and she also, that was another thing. As soon as she found out about the molestation, they got divorced as well. So she was a good mother. She did the right thing.
Good.
The only problem is it had been going on for a long time.
Right.
And the kids didn't tell her about it for a million different reasons why people don't say things. It's just so unfortunate, and those children should not have to be responsible for this. Obviously, it's
absolutely.
not. It is okay. I mean, not that it's okay they didn't tell. You know what I mean? That it's not. That's not their responsibility. So after his divorce, he actually did adopt. I mentioned this before. 2 more children. I believe he was 55 at the time. 2 girls named Sonia and Nanette. And they were 2 girls that he delivered at his hospital. Mm-hmm. The mother must have not been able to care for them, and so he adopted them.
Wow.
And what is so bizarre is that these two daughters, Sonia and Nanette, they did not experience any of this. Any molestation, anything like that. I don't even know if they knew about him using his own sperm with clients. So kind of a very different experience for them. And of course, there's a chance that they did fall victim to abuse and they're just not talking about it.
Right.
But it seemed more so that they did not experience it, but that hearing about all of this was very hard for them to hear and hard for them. Not that they don't believe these people. It's just obviously that is such a toll on them psychologically. To know that their father was capable of this. But before they even knew about the molestation, because that came out later, they did find out about him using his own sperm. They didn't know that growing up, like he had told his other kids, but they found out when they were adults because some lawsuits started to happen.
Right.
Because like we said, for, $70 or whatever, anyone can get a full DNA profile.
Right.
So people are, popping out of the woodwork.
Absolutely, I'm sure.
But at least at the time of the lawsuit, they settled out of court and he made everyone sign an NDA. A non-disclosure agreement means you can't talk about it. And he was never charged with anything. It was just like a civil suit.
Yeah.
And
a lot of people didn't even find out who their actual father was till after he was gone.
Because he died in 2006, I believe, at the age of 93. I think 93. I mean, and that's what's crazy. He was still seeing patients in his 90s.
That's insane.
And he had moved his office into his home. And not just like when he turned 90, because he's like, I can't walk. It had been in his home for a while, which doesn't really mean anything, I guess. I just find that odd because at least at the time, there was no law in Nevada prohibiting this. That's why earlier I said, is this true crime? Because he technically did not commit a fucking crime.
Really?
That's how fucked up the laws are.
I mean, it must be a case of they just didn't have laws for that yet.
Because it
seems like that's
I don't know if there's a law about it now. I honestly don't know. Now I think there is because you need to have consent. It's just very...
Yeah, that's so fucking weird.
I find this so disgusting. But so his daughters did at least know about that. He was in court for it. But so yeah, he died in good standing. I think he did get his license taken away. But he had already retired.
He was already in his 90s. Like, what's he... Right.
But then he actually did retire after the court case or something.
Okay.
Or during the court case. And after that, they took his license away. And he's like, I already retired.
Wow.
And I mean, he was named Doctor of the Year by the Nevada State Medical Association in 1991.
Jesus God.
I mean, people just don't... I don't know why people don't... I don't know. I mean, it's just...
Is it like an internet thing? Like, is it because... Like, obviously, news could get around before. But like you said about how you didn't have Yelp and stuff. Back then, I mean, you just kind of had to trust people did what they were advertising that they did.
And I mean, he had a huge success rate.
Exactly. That's the other thing. He was actually technically incredible at his job.
But here's the thing. Are you incredible at your job or do you just have strong sperm? Are you a fertility specialist? That's the other thing about his sperm.
His sperm must have been goddamn Spartans, for Christ's sake.
Jesus. But it's like, so are you a fertility... That's why it bothers me. It's like everyone's touting you off as this great fertility specialist. When really you're just using your own sperm. It's like you're not really even doing anything. However, I'm sure he did a lot of other things, when women were experiencing infertility that, he couldn't. So there are lots of things that he could do. And also, I'm sure he saw people who weren't white that he couldn't do this to. I'm sure he understood that too. So
right.
I'm sure he saw some people that he actually did genuinely help. I'm sure sometimes he did actually use an appropriate donor.
Right.
I mean, he was using his own sperm at least through the 80s, maybe even into the 90s.
Do they have any idea of how many people...
Hundreds.
He might have hundreds.
Yeah.
Gee.
Because they said he saw thousands of patients for infertility.
Unbelievable.
So he must have at least have hundreds of children that are just living out there. And because DNA testing wasn't really available yet, obviously. I mean, in the 80s it was there, but it was very expensive and it was more so like just for crime scenes.
Oh, I see.
So he didn't really feel... I think he never thought he was going to get caught.
Wow.
I think he never thought, and then maybe when the 90s started rolling around, he realized, okay, people might find out, but I don't think he could have predicted that people could so easily find out their genetic background as it is now. I mean, it just takes a couple weeks or days or whatever now to just send a little cheek swab, send it back.
Absolutely.
You know, even though these families had a child, and is fantastic, and they wanted these children, and they were happy to get them, as we've, mentioned before, there's so much that goes into it that makes that not be okay morally. But then another thing just practically for them. For example, there's another doctor named Dr. Klein, who was another fertility doctor who basically did the exact same thing that Fortier did, except he was based in Indianapolis. So it was basically the same thing, but Indiana style. And this is just a great quote from one of my sources here that I think really illustrates this well. The donor children have begun cataloging the ways their own paths have crossed too. White, one of the children, went to Purdue at the same time as one of his half-brothers. One sibling sold another a wagon at a garage sale. 2 of them lived on the same street. 2 had kids on the same softball team. They're worried that their children are getting old enough to date soon. Did you not consider we all live in a relatively close area? One sister said she wondered about Klein. Did you really think that we wouldn't meet? That we wouldn't maybe date? That we wouldn't have kids who might date? Did you never consider that? Klein now looms over their kids' every innocent crush, their every prom date. I mean, that's crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, this is actually a nightmare. As an Irish Catholic person living in Chicago growing up, I was so worried about this happening. I genuinely was like, I'm going to have sex with my cousin by accident. It's going to happen. Thankfully, it didn't. But I worried about it. And this is why. I mean, these people lived sometimes on the same street and knew each other.
That's insane.
And they were siblings or cousins.
Wow.
I mean, they could so easily. I mean, that just really scares me.
Horrifying.
And I think that's just another repercussion about this and why this is so wrong. And if you're wondering why it's wrong, go back, listen to our royal inbreeding episode, okay? It's you don't want to do it. Inbreeding, you got to avoid it. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but you got to kind of try to not do it. One thing that I did see watching this documentary that did warm my heart was the way that seeing some of these videos of the dads, not the biological father, not Fortier, but the dads, how they interacted with their children when seeing some of these home videos and stuff. Almost all the time, the dads did not know this. So I know they didn't know, but it's still just like seeing how much love they have for this child that technically isn't their biological child. And I know they many of them thought it was, but it's still just so really kind of beautiful to see the capacity that we as human beings have to love one another and to care about a child. And to be with them their whole lives.
Absolutely.
And that's something that came up with a few people in the documentary, is that a lot of these people, their fathers have already passed away, their dads have already passed away. A few of them said, like, I'm glad this came out after my father passed away. Like this, it would be so hard on him to know. And that's sad, but in a way I think that's really beautiful.
Absolutely.
So it does, in one way it doesn't matter if your kid isn't your biological kid.
Genetics are a very powerful thing, but you're also more than who your parents are.
Yes. One of my closest cousins that I feel the most connected to is adopted. It doesn't matter. I think it's just all about communication and consent.
Absolutely.
And everyone being on the same page. Now, as I said, there was another doctor in the Indianapolis area that was also doing this, but it's not just the 2 of them that were doing these crazy experiments, basically. In 1987, a national survey of fertility doctors found that 2% had used their own sperm in patients.
Damn.
I know 2 is low, but it should be 0.
It should be 0.
If you say to your patient, hey, I can donate you sperm, are you okay with that?
Yeah.
Then sure, who literally cares? You're going to have a smart baby that likes science. What could be wrong? But it's like you got to fucking say something.
Exactly.
Oh God, it just drives me crazy.
Absolutely.
So any of our Creep Street connoisseurs, any of our Creep Street Homeowners Association, I don't want you to panic or freak out though, because this does not happen anymore because of the genetic testing, because doctors know they can't get away with this.
Exactly.
So this is not meant to scare anyone, like, not at all. Just how crazy things were before, and thank God it's not like that anymore.
Yeah. This man was a monster.
An absolute chode.
All right, well, that is going to wrap it up for Dr. Fortier.
Woo! A little bit of a different speed for us, but I liked it.
Yes, a monster we needed to cover.
Yeah.
Maureen, thank you for all that research.
Thank you for all of your support.
Thank you. Please rate, subscribe, share us with all your friends. If you want to get a little more, of course, go to patreon.com/Creep Street Podcast.
That's right.
Citizens of the Milky Way, my name is Dylan Hackworth.
I am Maureen Bogey.
And this is Creep Street. Good night and goodbye.
Goodbye.